Hello, everybody. I am Richard Brent, the editor-in-chief of LPM magazine here, and a very warm welcome to you today. Thank you for joining us. Thank you for joining us again. If you have been participating in the other sessions that we have been running this week, this is the third and final day of LPM Digital Conference 2021. Kindly supported by our partners who are, you can see displayed behind me on the board, Access Point, Cloud Genie, CTS, Iceberg, and Net Documents. Thank you very much to all of them for partnering with us this week. We've had a really great broad range of sessions over those 3 days. Today is the last day, as I say, a blend of deep dive interviews with the LPM team and interactive sessions and group challenge tackling that we've always sought to include in these events. And these are all designed to deliver some really practical insights for you based on how your peers are handling common challenges. We've explored things from making business activity more environmentally sustainable to effective succession planning, to the latest lever that firms might need to address carefully as office life now cautiously starts to return, hybrid working, of course. And today, it is revisiting the risk landscape. Well, you could say we haven't left it, perhaps. That was just sort of finding our way through it as ever. But it's specifically time to put information security under the spotlight at an unprecedented moment of change, perhaps in terms of how people are having to work in new ways or choosing to work in new ways and navigating that terrain. Is this exposing them to significantly greater threat than before? And if so, what are the potential repercussions of that? But preferably opportunities, of course, for effectively mitigating it. And my guest to talk about this this morning is a solicitor and a leading expert in data protection, cybersecurity, and social media law, Peter Wright. He is Managing Director of Digital Law UK, and in that role he advises clients from across the UK, Europe, the Middle East, and North America. It's a specialist law firm in the UK providing advice solely on data protection, cybersecurity, and social media law, as well as e-commerce. And Peter has also pioneered technology to market and deliver his own legal services to clients. And Peter's also chair of the Policy and the Regulatory Affairs Committee of the Law Society, the chair of its GDPR working group, and Law Society Council member for Yorkshire, as well as being on the Law Society board. He mentions, he works at Digital Law UK in his spare time. He's also the author of the Law Society Cybersecurity Toolkit, which is being updated at the moment from its 2016 edition in light of the new challenges that we're going to be, of course, discussing this morning. And he also hosts a podcast for Digital Law UK. Prior to opening Digital Law UK in 2014, he also advised the government on data protection and Freedom of Information Act matters. So just to remind you, that as with all of our sessions, you can ask questions by using the Q&A at the bottom of Zoom here, and I will be feeding those across to Peter as they come through, as well as of course talking to him, asking him my own questions. I'd encourage you to ask any questions that you want to. Also have your say. If you have different perspectives on the things that Peter is talking about, please bring those up as well, and we'll take those on. So obviously I'm going to kick us off, and Peter, I think we have to start with a very sort of broad brush question, which is we'll start with technology. So what are the biggest challenges, weaknesses that you see firms grappling with specifically from the technology standpoint when it comes to protecting themselves at the moment?
Well, thank you, Richard, and hello, everyone. Really looking forward to this discussion, and that's a really good question to kick off with. I think one of the biggest challenges, and sometimes this is something that affects bigger firms more so than smaller ones, perhaps, is the challenge around the sort of the IT estate, when very often there are a lot of legacy systems. So you could have legacy hardware, older phones, tablets, older systems that have been invested in, procurement decisions from sometimes many years ago that were very expensive at the time. And sometimes it can be seen as being quite expensive to sort of undo or wind back previous decisions that have been made. And that can mean that faced with the challenges of, say, suddenly thinking, right, we've suddenly got to have everyone working from home. Sometimes very quick fixes were found to enable that to happen at speed last year. But sometimes security wasn't necessarily the overriding concern. And as things have gone on, I don't think, in March of 2020, I don't think anyone necessarily anticipated that it would take the best part of 18 months until something like normality, he says, touch wood, something like normality is where we are now. I don't think we thought it would be quite that long. So sometimes decisions were taken that have meant that sometimes you've had significantly greater risk being baked into daily operations. And that's then had a bit of a knock-on effect. So it's that sort of, as I say, that sort of legacy environment that's not helped. I think the other problem as well is that sometimes there's a lack of understanding around the nature of the threats. If you aren't particularly up to speed on technology and cyber, if someone, a real expert, starts turning up and throwing technical terms at you, lawyers very often glaze over after about 5 to 10 minutes because they're simply overwhelmed with technical language and jargon that they simply don't understand. And that's not the fault of the lawyer. Sometimes it's the fault of an expert having not really gauged the level of the audience. But sometimes I think as lawyers, we're really, really good at our specialist areas. But sometimes our wider understanding of the technology has, and the fact that it's not something we're taught, it's not something that we've had to specifically bake in sometimes as part of our understanding and our practice, has meant that we are not necessarily well equipped to then deal with some of these challenges. So then when you get someone coming in and waving their arms like a windmill and trying to explain the technicalities of ransomware threats, we aren't necessarily computing that problem with what that then means in terms of how we're delivering services on a daily basis. And so there's that sort of lack of understanding. You've then tie that up with the legacy issues. And then sometimes there's a bit of a lack of willingness to tie those two issues together. It's then not surprising if you've got a board in a firm that's looking and thinking, well, do we really want to? Given all these risks, should we be investing in more IT? Or should we be willing to write a check for XYZ security measure, and will this really be effective? Or, you're telling me it's bad now, will it carry on being bad? What is the return on the investment that we're going to get here? So I think sometimes it means that you're having quite difficult conversations at a senior level because of all of those factors rolled together. And that makes it, I think, very, very difficult for a lot of firms to then be able to properly get a sort of full strategic grip on the risk around cybersecurity as a whole.
Okay, yeah, and you started off by saying that perhaps more so for larger firms, but are those challenges exacerbated for smaller firms? LPM sort of goes right down to the very smallest law firms, which are maybe even more exposed potentially.
Potentially, yes, because of course they're not going to have the resources to throw at something that a bigger firm will have. But when you actually get into the nuts and bolts of this, it isn't actually necessarily a matter of sort of equality of arms and having money to throw at a problem.
Right.
The most effective things you can do are not necessarily expensive things.
Okay.
It comes down to really being able to sometimes move in an agile manner. And smaller firms can look and think, actually, to invest in, say, getting all of our staff up to date equipment, or being able to invest in a new secure system or new measures of security, or being able to get everyone trained to a fairly high level to spot some of the risks. That can sometimes be quicker and easier to do for a smaller firm than a larger one. So just to give you an example, I know of one firm in the very far north of England. So far, it's almost Scotland. And they were, even though they're a comparatively small high street firm in one of these sort of 300-year-old, very nice buildings with beautiful views of the coast and everything, your typical bucolic view of English rural landscape. They were within days of having to think about how we're going to work remotely. Everyone had the right kit, they'd established working practices, they got the systems that they already had, and they made sure everyone knew how to use them, and they started using things like e-signatures and delivering things flexibly very, very quickly. But they're also doing that with knowledge around security and risks, and their compliance officer was already very up to speed on issues around cybersecurity and data protection. So they found it a relatively painless operation. Yet I've come across within the last couple of weeks some surprisingly large firms, some surprisingly large UK firms that are still insisting on hard copy documents, that are still insisting on wet signatures, that are still kind of operating in the 2010s. And I found that surprising. I think the reason for that is those three issues that I just outlined. It's that whole issue around legacy, training, sometimes massive infrastructure, lack of understanding, and lack of a sort of strategic grip around being able to really deal with it. And that's where the smaller firms, the more agile firms, like a speedboat, are then sort of running ahead of the bigger firms that are a bit like oil tankers that require a lot of strategic decision making and investment and everything before they can start to turn in the right direction.
Okay, yes. It's a simpler process of getting from one point to the next. But you've already referenced it's not all about obviously fixing things with technology. You talked about the people side of things, leadership. What are the top weaknesses aside from potentially the technology estate that you identify?
Yeah, so I think having the right technical measures, technical security measures is important, absolutely. But I always think that if you're going to have effective risk management around cybersecurity, there are three things you need, and the technology is only one of them. And that technology includes both secure ways of working and then the necessary security measures, be that having secure VPNs that people are able to log into when they're working remotely, as well as perhaps the right secure platforms, the right measures, the right operating systems on mobile devices, those sorts of things. So that's the technology box. And the other two areas that I think are just as important are insurance, in terms of making sure you've got the right breach liability insurance in place. Just because you might be actually paying what you think compared to your PII premium is a fairly small premium to have breach liability insurance in place, do not presume that it does everything you think it will do. And you don't want to have that rather painful lesson when you've just had an incident and you're then thinking, oh, this is a problem. How do I now pay for an investigator to come in and work out what the level of the damage is? And if the attack is still ongoing, for example, how do I then pay potentially for the fact that I might be looking at regulatory investigations and penalties from the SRA and the ICO? What about the group class action that you might face from affected data subjects? Be that, and it's not always clients you're looking at here. I mean, it could be staff. Say it's a payroll detail that is compromised. You could be facing a class action from your own staff for that. And so there can be a lot of associated expenses we're looking at here. And you want in that instance to have an insurance policy that is going to pay out enough, and you don't want to then find that certain things are excluded. What if it says, oh, regulatory fines are excluded? What if it says costs of defending a class action are excluded, or the costs of paying out awards in a class action, they're excluded? So you don't want to suddenly find that out when you lift the bonnet on the insurance policy and find it isn't actually as all singing and dancing as you at first hoped. And to be honest, you may end up thinking, okay, fine, well, we'll go and check this, but it's actually worth sometimes actually retaining a specialist insurance lawyer to actually take a look through the policy and be able to give you a sort of warts and all summary in terms of what's actually covered here. But then the third and most final important thing is training. And I'm not talking about death by PowerPoint either. I'm talking about being able to train your staff over a period of time to spot the risks, identify what needs to be done, engage your staff in the process. Don't just make their job more difficult with more barriers that they have to jump through to be able to do their job. Instead, you want to engage them in, as I say, that constant risk management, be able to listen, if they come up with ideas like, oh, well, actually, what about if we were able to, identify risk by doing X, Y, Z in a quicker and easier way than we may have just been asked to do it. So make it a sort of two-way exchange. Make sure you're keeping a clear eye on the outcome that you're looking for, which is working more securely, managing risk, and making sure everyone's engaged on that journey. And I cannot stress this highly enough, this is for everyone. So, you know, the senior people who sometimes go, oh, I'm sorry, I suddenly find I've got a really important meeting that means I can't attend the training session.
Yes.
Likewise, the junior people, the person on reception who's been told, sorry, you've got to stay there operating the phones while everyone else is in the training session, or the temp who comes in for 3 months during the summer or something. Everyone has to be involved in this. No, there are no excuses. It's got to be everyone involved, because then the person who isn't involved, they could be the one who clicks on the link they shouldn't have done. They could be the one who is engaged in a workaround that you don't know about. And a quick example of that, and hopefully we'll have lots of examples I can give you today. I did hear of one firm where they were having it was the receptionist who would then get in touch with the client and check the ID as part of the process for the onboarding. And rather than taking a screenshot of the ID and saving that, making sure that that was then put onto the system and doing a client conflict check, they found it difficult to do that for some reason. And instead, they would get the picture of the ID on the screen in front of them and then take a picture with their iPhone of that, put it onto their iCloud account, and then share it from there, because that was quicker. That didn't happen until someone was actually looking over their shoulder and realized, what are you doing? Oh, it's quicker if I do it this way. No, don't do that. You're circumventing all of our security measures. And that's where you get these sorts of problems if you've then had someone who hasn't been part of that journey around making sure you're working in a safe and secure manner.
Interesting. Yes. So no excuses of back-to-back Zoom calls for not participating in this. Then.
Exactly. Or the overrunning lunch commitment involving several bottles of wine or something. No, you cannot have that.
Yes.
Everyone's got to buy into it.
That's the old equivalent, isn't it? Yeah, absolutely. People have said, of course, that training has been. It's been said to us quite a few times on the magazine side that training has been particularly difficult thing to deal with in the context of the way we're now working, because it's good to get people together to sort of share stories about this, to share experiences about this, and things might be missed doing it online. Do you have any sort of view on that, and what can be done to sort of make the online training experience better?
It has to be interactive, and even using Zoom or Teams or whatever your video conference platform is, WebEx, who knows? I think the key thing is make sure it's a two-way process. If it's one person just coming in and talking in tech speak with loads of very detailed slides, that's going to switch people off very, very quickly, particularly if they're told, oh, this is for an hour from 1 till 2 during your lunch, you're going to log on and watch this.
Yes.
I mean, people will know as well that a lot of the video conferencing platforms now, and indeed our firm, when we do training, we've actually got a platform that tells us if people have opened up other windows in front of it so they can zone out and start checking emails or going on Facebook or something. We know if they're doing that. So sometimes you have to be able to go, oh, actually, user so-and-so, if you wouldn't mind coming back, yeah, we know that you're not looking at this, just to be able to sort of bring them back into the room. But when I say it's got to be interactive in two ways. So it's a matter of asking questions. It's actually asking people about their daily responsibilities, how they are working. And in particular, when people have been working from home, it's like, well, what devices are you using? Are you necessarily using work-provided devices? Do you prefer working on a tablet? Are you in touch with your colleagues through a phone? Is that your work phone? Are you using a secure platform? What would be better for you? How do you prefer to work? Actually have it as I say, a bit more of a two-way dialogue to get people to start thinking about how they are working, how they're doing, fulfilling their responsibilities. And then in the course of that, you'll start to suddenly work out where you can actually highlight, there could be some risks here, and start to get them to think about, well, what does best practice look like?
Yeah. Thanks for that, Peter. So everyone has to be involved in training, no excuses there, but it's obviously there's a lot of things to keep, just to state the obvious, there's a lot of things to keep on top of here. So who is ultimately responsible for each of these things that you've talked about? Is it one person? Is it somebody different? And how can you resource that at a smaller firm? Is there an optimum way for information security to be structured, divided up, or does it depend?
So there's several problems that very often come out here. One is where you'll have one person who's been designated as the person who has to deal with all of this. And sometimes it could be, it's the compliance officer is also going to have to deal with information security, and they're already stressed enough dealing with everything the SRA want them to do before you start saying, actually, you've got to now look at security and risk issues as well. So they might not necessarily be well equipped to deal with that. And then do they necessarily have a seat or the power to speak to a board and try and corral them into making decisions around investment in IT and security, or even getting the board to back training, saying, oh, actually, we're going to do training every 3 months on this, and we need buy-in from you people at the top so that everyone else follows. Because if you all decide you're not going to take part, everyone else is going to feel that the three-line whip on them is somewhat unfair. So, you've got to have that ability to both buy in with the board, also to get the board to understand the risks, to be able to say, look, these are the potentially attempted breaches we've had, or relaying, these are the incidents or the near incidents that we've had. These are the things that are keeping me awake at night. Let's do something about it. But also, I think the problem is you don't want it to be one person. It doesn't necessarily mean, oh, I've got to go out and recruit a team of people, but it means that you want a sort of a cluster, a small focused team of people. And it could be that they spend 80% of their time fee earning or doing other administrative tasks, but they then join and support the person whose responsibility this is, so that if that person is there away on holiday, or they just, for whatever reason, can't be contacted, you don't then find yourself in the position that, oh, it's 6 o'clock on the Friday evening of a bank holiday, and we can't find the person that would ordinarily be responsible for dealing with this issue because they've taken the Friday off and they're off on a staycation somewhere. So in that instance, you don't want to be sort of relying on the key person without whom the whole system collapses. Which means, A, you want a small focused team of other people that know what to do, know where the breach response plan is, know what technical measures need to be done, might know the contact information of an IT specialist, a security specialist you can bring in who can then, work out what the problem is, stop any ongoing access issues. It could be the attack is still in progress, so you want to close down that. All these sorts of things need to be done and done quickly. Particularly when you think you're under a requirement to report any data protection breach within 72 hours to the Information Commissioner. So you want to have that focused team, and also you don't want to be finding out how that process works for the first time when you've had a breach. So actually do a sort of war game and scope out, if the worst happened, if we faced some apocalyptic data breach and all of our confidential client information, privileged information was lost or compromised, or we were locked out by a ransomware attack, what would you do? And that will very quickly get you to a point where you are then able to work out, right, who needs to be involved on this? What do we do if certain people aren't available? What are the mechanisms we're going to have, and make sure they actually work? And then that means testing it on a regular basis. And another anecdote, I did hear of one organization, and they went, oh yes, we've got this brilliant breach response plan. Rolls-Royce, everyone knows how to do it. We spent a lot of money on this, and it's really effective. And then the experts who got in there said, okay, fine, let's test it then. And within an hour, it descended to an argument at board level, because of course, half the people who were mentioned in that plan no longer worked there. The other half had all been promoted to different responsibilities and said, well, it's no longer my responsibility. I have nothing to do with this. So it just you got a load of finger pointing and arguing rather than practical management of the risk that your firm is facing as of that precise moment. And therefore, it's very much emphasizing that all of the measures we're going to talk about today have to be then sort of baked into the way the firm operates on a rolling basis. But you're having to do that with all your other risk and compliance to comply with everything that the regulators need. So it's just doing it alongside that, really.
Sometimes stage stage incidents, don't they, to sort of test their preparedness in this. Is that something that you see happening more, or is it something that firms could be doing more?
It absolutely is something that needs to be done more. So the idea of being able to get a pen test carried out whereby a white hat hacker tries to penetrate your firm's defenses and identify where the weak spots are, so you know where they are and where an attack is likely to come from, I think is invaluable. So that could mean that, they'll test and see, could your website be taken down? Would they be able to get through to, for example, on your firm's website, is there a contact form? Is that contact form information something that they'd be able to hack? And could they see all of the inquiries your firm's ever picked up during the whole time that contact form's been in place? These are the sorts of things that happen. Can they break into your firm's server, cloud system? Could it be they find a vulnerability from something else on that system, like say your CCTV network or something, and if that's hacked, can they then get through to everything else? All of these little things And I appreciate the fact that every organization's system architecture is different, but they will be able to then go through and find, well, where are the vulnerabilities? Because if you don't have that done, you're pretty much in the dark, and you could be sat there thinking, well, we've got wonderful defenses here, and I'm sure this is fine, and nothing's happened so far, so we have nothing to worry about. But it could be that there's a vulnerability on there from, a patch that hasn't been upgraded, a piece of older legacy tech that a number of people in the firm are using that you simply aren't aware of, and you won't be aware of it until the worst happens. And believe me, you might think, oh, this is going to take more time and more money. It might do, but believe me, that'll be better than when you're suddenly thinking, great, we've now faced some sort of apocalyptic breach. No one can now access any of the data we've got. We've lost all of our precedents. How are we going to get our system back up and running? And, you suddenly start losing day after day after day of activity. And, I think senior lawyers need to think about that. I think, how panicked you get if you suddenly find that the entire firm can't record time for a day. Think about what happens if they can't record time for 3 weeks while the system's down and you're trying to rebuild it.
Yes. So you're updating the cybersecurity toolkit. Which things in the context of the last year are sort of flashing ever redder on the radar? Which risks are on the rise or sort of evolving at frightening pace?
So I'd say the big one has been ransomware. There's a proliferation of it. It is very easy for hackers to be able to buy very low cost tools on the dark web that allow them to launch a ransomware attack. What do I mean by ransomware? That's where you would suddenly find that you're locked out of your system and everyone in the firm suddenly just has got a screen saying you're locked out from your files. We demand a ransom payable in Bitcoin, failing which, if you don't pay it within 48 hours or however long, all your data will be deleted. And faced with that, too many firms turn around and go, oh, we better pay the ransom, rather than actually having a plan in place to say, well, how are we going to actually get all of our data back, restore to the last time that your system had been safely backed up, be able to actually get all your devices restarted and up and running without having to pay criminals to get your data back, which should be the last thing you do. Because guess what? They're criminals. There is no guarantee that when you pay them the ransom, that they're going to release the data or that you'll get everything back working the way you wanted to. So don't think, oh, that's the quick, easy way of doing it. But I've been amazed at how many big organizations, when they've looked, some of them have been hacked multiple times because, of course, the hacker then realizes, oh, that was easy. We'll do that again in 2 weeks and get some more out of them. So you don't want to really go down that route if you can possibly help it. So yeah, ransomware.
Yeah,
that's the big thing. The second thing is the risks from remote working from home.
Okay, I was going to ask if that one was connected to the remote working.
Well, it kind of is, because then people are more vulnerable. You might have in your office, firewalls and secure systems, and then if people are outside the office working on their home networks, they aren't necessarily benefiting from all the security measures that you had in your office. So you can find that, for example, you've got people working at home on home networks that weren't designed for business use. You could have multiple devices on those networks that could be compromised. I mean, at home now, what have we got on our home Wi-Fi networks? You might have satellite TV. You might have smart devices, so your smart TV. You might have an Echo on there, Amazon Echo. You could have other smart speakers. Your burglar alarm might be wired up to the broadband. And even now you can get everything, smart fridges, smart kettles. One of those electric online alarms so that you can see if someone's knocking on your door when you're away and it comes up on you. All that's running through your home broadband. And guess what? All of those other systems can be hacked, so they can then potentially get into your work device through the home network, which doesn't have the security measures on that your business network does. And I mean, as well, don't presume, unfortunately, that everyone who's got access to your home broadband and home Wi-Fi is necessarily, obviously close family and friends is fine. But I always say to a lot of people, think about it. Have you got teenage children? Do they have their friends over? Do they all ask for the Wi-Fi so they can then go and engage in online gaming? And the answer, if usually you've got the teenagers, is yes, that's exactly what they do. And if it isn't the online gaming, it's just so they can go on Instagram or whatever it is. But point is, they're very often far more proficient in then potentially going into your router, looking at your other devices, looking at other things than you are. So when you have people coming around, think carefully about who you then go, here's the Wi-Fi password, eat your heart out. You might want to partition your home network, which you can do. But very often people haven't thought about this. So, one of the big things is just, if you have a lot of your staff working at home, I think it's a good thing to institute a bit of a process whereby you might do an audit, you might send, IT or security staff to each fee earner's home or each person who's working remotely, just so that you can check, well, how are you working? What's your home environment like? Can we make sure that we are minimizing risk, having those sorts of, partition networks? So you've got a business network for your work and everything else on another network. Or another network that you give to your guests so they can't get in. So that's the long answer to a short question, but the extra threat vectors that we have opened up by suddenly working from home have meant that we're now facing this, another pandemic of ransomware and cybersecurity attacks, because it's suddenly so much easier for people to get in. And the final point, just remember that the hackers, it's not like, someone highly skilled who is sitting there writing their own code and coming up with all of these programs. The average hacker is actually quite low skilled when it comes to IT. They're just buying these programs off the dark web and then making money out of it. And they're making a darn sight more money than they would do by other criminal enterprises, which is why they're then doing it more and more and more.
Okay. I suppose the other thing that's obviously become ubiquitous is platforms like this one, which we were hardly using, 18 months ago. Is that something where firms are also exposing themselves to significantly more risk than they were?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. Oh, well, yeah, I can give you the short answer. The short answer is yes. The long answer is absolutely. Just because everyone else is using a popular system, do not presume, as the lemmings all jump over the cliff, that you should necessarily follow them. And I'm afraid Zoom is one of those tools. Even though it's been very, very popular, it's very user-friendly and we're running conferences on it, it's not necessarily the most secure platform if you want to be speaking to your clients.
Right.
If I tell you that in 2019, the people that set up and run Zoom told all of their investors it is a secure encrypted platform. So the investors said, jolly good. And on that basis, more investment was made. And by the time 2020 came along, at the time of the pandemic last year, when it first started off, that class action was still underway. And the investors were saying, we're suing you because the platform was not secure and encrypted in the way they had been led to believe. So that's a problem when statements are being made to the market, made to investors to say this is a wonderful secure platform, and it isn't. Now, measures have subsequently been taken to try and improve its security. But, we've got 38 people on this call, and it could be that they have been in other events over the course of the last 18 months where Zoom bombing has occurred.
Mm-hmm.
I'm certainly at one conference where someone logged in and of course, they then seized control of it and started making silly sounds and waving around and things because they wanted to. Just fine in a conference setting, but you don't really, it's not very professional if that happens when you're talking to a client because for some reason that link could have been compromised and someone somehow got hold of it. But then it means that you can't demonstrate to the regulator that you have taken all possible means of security to make sure that your communications are as secure as possible. So, I appreciate this is the longer answer rather than the short answer, but
that's what I wanted.
Therefore, it's a matter of thinking when you're looking at what systems to use, make sure you're asking the basic questions. Where's the data going to be stored? Where will the recordings be stored? Okay, you can download them, but they might also be stored on that platform. Where are the servers located? Are they encrypted? Who has access to them? When you're setting up the calls, can you make it so that there are only a limited number of links or specific links for specific people? How can you lock down the access to the platform? And an awful lot of the more premium services, Teams allows this. I'm not a fan of Teams by any stretch, but it is a more secure platform. It's also a pain, so I'm not necessarily going to use that. I'm not generally a fan of Microsoft products at all. But WebEx is another one that actually I find is quite a good secure platform to use. Okay, it's a premium product. Also, GoToMeeting and GoToWebinar are good platforms. Again, they're premium, but at least they're more secure. But the point is that it's a matter of stopping and looking and thinking before making a procurement decision and taking the same platform that everyone else is using.
Yes, okay. Yeah. I think that you were telling me before that, you know, that stands for IT products, technology products, just generally, doesn't it? You know, whatever you're looking at potentially introducing, that you need to ask more questions perhaps than people typically do.
Absolutely. At a conference a few years ago, one of these where they had lots of different suppliers with their stands and everything, they said, "Oh, we'd like you to judge the awards on best cybersecurity provider." So we went and looked at various platforms that were being marketed to law firms, and I just had a couple of very basic questions around where are your servers, what encryption standard have you got, which you'd hope that the slick salesperson in the suit would be able to turn around and go, "Oh yes, it's, you know, RSA 256-bit, and the servers are in a secure location in wherever, somewhere in the UK, Ireland, Europe, whatever." You would want that. I would have thought that you'd have that basic information, which assists the person asking the question from a compliance perspective to have that. You'd have thought that would be part of the sales patter, something you would almost want to say, well, this is how good it is. And I was amazed that most of them were like, I don't know about that. I'll have to go and check. I'll have to go and find out. And you think, okay, that's not great. And in some instances, it turned out that they didn't know because they didn't have basic security measures in place, and they weren't complying with the basic requirements that the SRA have for any cloud product that law firms should use. So do not presume that just because someone's got a snazzy logo and website and some really good professional salespeople saying how wonderful a product or platform is and how it'll be the answer to your prayers, do not assume that it is necessarily compliant from a regulatory compliance perspective, and that it is, do not assume it's not opening you up to a risk.
Okay, yes. Just a reminder, everybody, do ask, do put any questions that you've got to Peter yourself in the Q&A here. I'll be ferrying those over to him. I've got plenty more questions, of course, for him myself, but we've got up to 20 minutes left of this session, so do get them in if you have them, or indeed, as I mentioned, observations on things that Peter said already. So this must be a tricky conversation to bring clients into, I would imagine. How should firms set about talking to clients about information security, where it most impacts clients? Should they need to do so?
I think it's really important to have this conversation with the client at the outset. And, you know, we're all familiar with, unfortunately, the onboarding process is a little bit laborious. You're doing all your anti-money laundering checks and making sure that they are receiving your firm's letter of engagement, and you're jumping through all of these hoops. But as part of that, I think it's useful just to say, have a sheet that you can, perhaps a small one-page PDF that you can just send to them that will say, you know, client communications, what can you expect from us? And say, look, you know, we will, you know, either communicate with you through our firm's secure platform, for example, which might allow for interaction, sharing of documents, secure messaging. Alternatively, is it going to be via email? I mean, funnily enough, I've got a lot of corporate clients who say we still have to communicate solely via email, because of the way our structures work. We can't go logging into, you know, an app and have that more interactive exchange. So, you know, first of all, I think actually find out how the client wishes to communicate, and then make sure that you provide secure comms around that. But also lay down some ground rules and say, we will not, for example, communicate with you via SMS text. We will not communicate with you or work via the sharing of Google Docs, for example, or we won't work, you know, using WhatsApp or Dropbox or some of these platforms that are easy to use, very intuitive, very quick. Everyone uses them, I know, but they are not necessarily secure and open you up to greater risk. And I think that's a conversation to have with a client at the outset for two reasons. One, to set expectations, but two, because I think it is important that the client should know what the secure means of communication with you will be. So if they do receive an SMS purporting to come from you, or a WhatsApp, or an email saying, here is a document for you to sign, when in fact you've already said, well, no, we will only provide you with a secure document through our case management system, for example. If they know that from the outset, they will then know if there has been a compromise somehow or another, and someone is impersonating your firm to your client. And I think if you are engaged in particular in the fields of private client work, conveyancing, if you've got large amounts of client money being stored on a system, and that comes for corporate work where you might be working on mergers, acquisitions, acquiring other businesses, etc., but you've got that money being washed through. Hackers know that is happening, and they will try and compromise it and inveigle themselves into the exchange somehow by hook or by crook. So if you have that conversation with the client at the outset to say, this is how we're going to communicate with you, and lay some ground rules, that minimizes the risk.
Yes.
No expensive technology. No, this is coming down to just having those sort of mechanisms in place from the outset that just then everyone knows where they stand. And then if something doesn't fit into those, you think, this must be a risk. From your training, your staff would know, oh, the client knows not to communicate with us via SMS, so I know that this must be potentially a problem, and I should go and check rather than instantly clicking on the link that's been received, for example.
So very much about the people side of things, the setting expectations, communication, etc. Okay, good you mentioned WhatsApp, because our first question has come in mentioning it as well. So how do you ultimately combat staff undermining business software, for example, with something like WhatsApp when they're used to using user-friendly things that you've
explain the risk. So as part of the training, and this is not just a matter of just yelling, don't use WhatsApp. It's instead about saying, look, we're going to provide you with a system, and it could be that you use, anything from, say, BlackBerry Enterprise Messenger or one of the other secure comms apps. So you can still have those internal conversations, which I think were really important actually for having our teams working remotely. I think it's really important actually that you can have a quick text or a quick phone call through a secure messaging app, absolutely. But I would just be very careful not to use WhatsApp. So first of all, make sure you've got an alternative system. Even Signal, which is a free system, and it's used by people like Elon Musk and various other entrepreneurs. They've said, this is a really good system. It is encrypted, it is secure. And if you then say, right, this is what we're going to use, then explain why you cannot use something else like WhatsApp. And explain, well, WhatsApp have just been fined hundreds of millions of pounds, hundreds of millions of euro for GDPR infractions because they are not legally compliant with how they handle data. And then talk about how WhatsApp, other people can be added to the communications too easily, so a discussion might not be secure. Explain the fact that WhatsApp is owned by Facebook. Most people don't know that. Explain that WhatsApp shares a lot of that data with Facebook. So you've got all these systems that are then potentially looking at conversations on WhatsApp and working out what's being said, so they can then serve ads to you when you go on to other platforms. Because if that's happening, that suggests it isn't necessarily confidential and privileged. So you have that conversation with staff and people then think, oh, actually, yeah, we shouldn't be using that, should we? And they'll understand and buy into another way of working. But you're absolutely right to raise that question. How do we stop people from using WhatsApp, Dropbox, these other free platforms? And it's through having, I think, that dialogue with staff in the training and then providing good alternatives that are as good as or better than WhatsApp or whatever the platform may be. And, I don't know about you, I find that the problem with WhatsApp is you've suddenly got too many discussions that are going on there. And one of them's from a stag weekend you were on 3 years ago with people still sharing different things.
Before you know it, you've put the wrong message in the wrong chat.
Exactly. Or the things always, you're getting notifications going on. At the moment, I'm forever getting WhatsApp messages because in the building we're in, we've got lots of other offices, there's an issue with the car park at the moment. So I'm getting texts from people who are running other businesses and they're saying, this issue about the parking, that about the parking. So you end up muting WhatsApp because you're like, I don't want to be mithered by more notifications. But if you're getting then, it's therefore not a good platform to have potentially important internal or client comms on, is it? So yeah, it's a matter of getting away from using those platforms and using something that's better and more fit for purpose, really. Let's face it.
Okay, I've got a couple of specific questions about specific resources, if that's all right, that have come through. Richard Hill asks, we regularly carry out safe phishing training in the business to continue awareness about email modification. Are there any examples of this type of real life testing and training on other cyber threats, other than phishing, such as sea-level fraud, that you could recommend?
Yeah, there are other free sort of systems out there, but what I would recommend is still being able to potentially bring in an expert, even if it's just that you have a conversation with someone and say, look, what systems do you find work, and actually to work out a package for you of different things. I mean, you're quite right that potentially just having the one there in term, something that does phishing, okay, well, you know that you're then looking for risks around phishing, but what about other threats? And there are other tools out there, which I'm not going to sort of go into now, because some of them are premium, some of them are free. But I think it's finding the right mix for your firm and for the way that you're operating. So even if it's just, as I say, a conversation with an expert that you have, who can then say, well, what's your infrastructure? What's your system? And then working out, well, I'd recommend X, Y, Z. It doesn't necessarily have to be a cybersecurity expert, a good IT infrastructure engineer, who you can have a conversation with, and they'll be able to say, well, from what you've just told me, I would do X, Y, Z. So I think it has to be system specific, and I don't want to sort of talk about any specific things now, in case you go, oh, right, well, that will do the trick, and it might still mean that you've got a risk on there that we haven't really covered.
Okay. I had a question myself about where firms might potentially turn to keep abreast of how risk factors keep changing over time. So they're on top of things. And somebody else has asked about Cyber Essentials, specifically Cyber Essentials Plus, whether that's, he asks Nigel Wallace, worth the time and money it takes to obtain. Sort of putting those two sort of ideas together, basically. Sort of what, A, Cyber Essentials, and B, where else might you go for that guidance?
I think it's a good starting point, and I'm glad you've said Cyber Essentials rather than say ISO 27001, which I've always felt is a sledgehammer to crack a walnut and doesn't necessarily close down the risk. But so many organizations I speak to and think, oh, we've got ISO 27001, we spent all the money and everything, and we've got all these ring binders full of compliance plans, and you think, great, but that doesn't mean you've necessarily closed down risk. Just because you've got ISO 27001 doesn't mean that you can then, for example, set up secure remote working within a matter of days when a global pandemic comes around. So, Cyber Essentials is a good start, as is Cyber Essentials Plus. Is it worth doing? Yes. If you've got no other accreditations in place, or you're starting from a baseline of thinking, well, we do, we're wanting to do something as an exercise. Yes, it is a good place to start, but I wouldn't say get your Cyber Essentials or Cyber Essentials Plus and then say, oh, great, we've got that, we're fine now, and then relax. I would use it as part of a process and say, okay, we've achieved that, but that doesn't mean that you have to then stop doing your continued ongoing look and assessment of risks for your firm and the way that you're working. So it's a good starting point, but for example, it's not necessarily that we don't necessarily say to our clients, rush off and get Cyber Essentials, because it's more about baking into the way the firm operates, a way of making sure that you are continually monitoring risk, assessing that risk, putting mechanisms in place to minimize that risk. And Cyber Essentials doesn't necessarily do that. So it's absolutely a nice to have. I think it also gives, clients and third parties confidence in your organization that you've got the little accreditation, say, yes, we've done this. So it's a good start, but it is not an end in itself. And I cannot emphasize that enough.
Not box ticked. Okay, that's fine.
I hate that phrase, because the minute that people are like, oh, well, we've done that now. No.
Doesn't work like that. Yeah.
Oh, we did training 3 years ago. We're fine. You're like, no.
Nobody who was here then is still here.
Exactly.
Yes. Okay. Have you've talked about cyber insurance, the importance of it, and the importance of examining it carefully. So have you got any advice on the questions to ask, or what specifically to look out for, what sort of flags to look out for when looking to purchase cyber insurance protection?
I would read through the exclusions very, very carefully. And of course, these things are written in, it's not, I've yet to see an insurance policy that would win, the kite mark from the campaign for plain English. So they're always deliberately drafted to try and exclude things that you might otherwise have thought were covered. So it's a matter of going through and thinking, well, what's excluded, when they're saying, oh yeah, so much cover here. Well, what are the circumstances when that payment will be made? How would you be able to go about making that claim? How long will that claim take? I mean, let's face it, if you're in the middle of a big cyber attack and you suddenly need to make a significant investment in new secure systems to close down the risk, can you necessarily afford to wait months and months and months for a claim to go through? And it's also a matter of, as I say, just actually sit down and think about, well, what are the total liabilities around this? Are we covered if on the back of a breach, our turnover catastrophically plummets, for a period of 3 months before then picking up afterwards? Will the insurance policy cover us for that loss of turnover? Will it cover us if suddenly one or two partners go, I don't like the look of this, I'm going to take me and my staff and we're going to clear off and go somewhere else? Will it cover you for loss of key people? So I think it's quite important to sort of work out what are the liabilities that are covered and what is and is not covered. But as I say, the key stuff is I would want to know that things like regulatory investigations, fines and enforcement, is that covered? Are you covered for the civil liabilities that could then flow in terms of class actions? If that isn't explicit in the policy, that might be something to then get some specific guidance on. But I'd sort of, rather than the stampede sometimes to sign on the line and say, look, we've got cover in place now. Look, this was after the last board meeting, I was told I had to go away and get this in place so I can now turn up at the next meeting and go say, look, I've got the policy in place. Sometimes it's actually worth just taking a minute just to say, well, actually, I'm going to get some specialist advice. I'm going to get an insurance lawyer. And it might cost me, 4 figures, 1,200 quid for a specialist insurance lawyer to look at this for a few hours and actually give me a summary in terms of what's covered and what is not. And of course, as is always the case, the policy wording changes from each one. So one insurance lawyer I know, he always says, look, I could go along and I could give you 3 different Lloyd's of London policies that refer to cyber liability, and one's 8 pages, one's 15 pages, one's 25 pages, and they all do very, very different things. So it's actually worth, I think, getting that little bit of specialist advice. And you might look and think, advice is going to cost more than the premium will. Yes, but you want to make sure that you're covered for the right thing. You don't want to find that the minute you want to call on that policy, that it doesn't do what you thought it said on the tin.
Yeah. Thank you. And thank you to Wayne Lord for that question. One more product-specific one. Following on from our conversation about the collaboration platforms, you mentioned WebEx and GoTo being good and Teams and Zoom not. So yeah, putting some words in your mouth, just paraphrasing there. But what is your opinion of Starleaf specifically, if you have one?
I'll be honest, I've not actually used it. I have spoken to people from Starleaf at different legal conferences, and they've always seemed very well put together, very professional. They've had a lot of investment, and they're not shy about then speaking on different platforms. So it looks like it's a good piece of kit, but if you were then looking at it and thinking, right, let's get hold of their contract and their terms, but I would still want to ask the questions about, what happens with the data, where are your servers, what encryption standards, and just have a conversation with them around safeguards and say, look, I'm really worried from a both a risk management and a regulatory compliance perspective. And I'm really worried about this. So what reassurance can you give me that your platform is secure and effective? And then you can say, look, even if they then give the information, you could then potentially get another third party to look at that and say, actually, well, let's have a look at this and actually just do a bit of a quick assessment for you for an hour or two of their time. And again, that will give you a little bit more security about knowing, well, at least I've done this. And then if the worst happens, if you do find yourself on the edge of a breach because of the investment you'd made in Starleaf or any other system for that matter, you can at least say to the ICO, the SRA, or whoever it may be, we didn't just stampede into this. We actually did do it quite carefully. We asked these questions. We had these answers. We had those answers assessed. What more could we reasonably have been expected to do, given our firm's size, given our resources, given the budget, given what we needed to do? What more could we really have done? And that's very often that sort of evidential burden. The regulators like it if you've tried to do something. They get a little bit upset if it's just like you've either done nothing to get, secure means and regulatory compliance measures in place, or they think it's just been lip service. So if you're actually then, as I say, baking these things in, I think that helps you. That would help you when it comes to defending issues around liability, doesn't it? If you can say that again, potentially if you're facing a class action over this, what more would it have been effective for us to do in this scenario? Final point just on Starleaf and any other contractor though is, always make sure before you sign on the dotted line what happens at the end of the relationship. So if you've been with Starleaf for 4 years, do you get back all of the recordings that you might have got for all of those videos? What happens to them? Do you get that back? Is that securely destroyed? If you do have a problem, is there a break clause in there so you can stop using them, or are you then committed to some horrific right? You've still got to use them for another 2 years. So always look through these sorts of contracts. In the same way as lawyers, we're always so thorough with so many other contracts. IT, it is the same thing. So we've really got to be careful and take our own advice. And this is where, you don't have to be a tech expert to go through. And as a lawyer, you apply the slide rule and make sure that contractor, that supplier is passing through the eye of a needle in the same way that you would be advising your own clients. We have the skills to do that. So it's really a matter of, really go through and look at the fine print on these things. And if there's something that you think, well, that's a bit ambiguous, probably a reason why it's been done in an ambiguous way. So settle out all those things right at the start, I think, is the best thing.
Okay, thank you. We have 2 minutes and one more question, which is therefore going to supersede mine. But I think my final question, but I think it might also be a challenging one to do in 2 minutes. But that's your challenge, Peter. Do the consequences of Brexit change matters from a cybersecurity perspective? For example, surrounding where data is stored. Go.
Yes, I would try and, if possible. And this is difficult. You can't be sure exactly what's around the corner. You may have seen we've got a new new Secretary of State for Culture, Media and Sport. Digital culture, media and sport as of this week. And the DCMS is reviewing currently this country's data protection laws. So you never know what could be around the corner. If I was wanting to insulate myself against future risk, I would want to make sure, if possible, my IT infrastructure is located in the UK. If it isn't in the UK, you want secure standard contractual clauses as mandated by the ICO, allowing you to access that data if it is in Canada or America or Europe or wherever else it may be. That then means that secure flow of data is in place.
Yeah.
That's been the main impact. And it's more around data protection rather than cybersecurity. And if we had more time, I could talk to you in great tedious detail around data adequacy and the issues around that. But as I say, when it comes to infrastructure, UK based is better because it allows you to demonstrate that you are then insulated against future problems that may come in because of the B word.
Thank you, Peter. Thank you so much. And thank you to everyone for listening and all your questions, of course, as well. As Ben has said, really interesting talk, tons to take away. I have to echo that and also pick up on what Sarah says, which is hopefully see some of you in person again as soon as possible to talk about more important issues and challenges. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Peter. And have a good rest of the day. Take care. Bye.